welcome to episode 35 of Rubbish Talk with myself, Alistair Meldrum.
And myself, Jane Bond.
So this week we have a long-standing member of, he's not quite a staff member, he's been a subcontractor for a long time, Craig Chandler, who is probably long overdue being on this podcast. More about Craig later. We're going to have a little bit of a roundup of the news of what's happening in the sector. So apart from a huge number of consultations that have been replied to from SEPA and Scottish Government and all sorts, Jane, what else is happening?
Well, I like this one. The eBay cuts sellers' fees to promote circular economy for fashion. So eBay has said that from 8th of April, it's free for individual sellers to list and sell pre-owned clothing items on its platform, which is great because, you know, it does promote that let's recycle, let's, you know, get different clothes, let's be able to buy clothes. I think it was a bit of probably a challenge from Vinted because there's quite a lot of these clothes, secondhand clothes ones, and I think Vinted was being seen as the one to go to, whereas now I think eBay are thinking, right, okay, we need to challenge this. And it says somebody was saying on LinkedIn that the average shopper hoards over £400 worth of unworn clothes. My goodness, I mean, I don't. My neighbour 2 doors down from me, she's brilliant. She has amazing clothes and she seems to get rid of them quite a lot. So I've got three bags of clothes in my living room that I've been sorting through and going, oh yeah, I like that one, I like that one, I like that one. So, you know, I'm definitely doing the reuse clothes bit and then take them to the cancer charity shop with my little cancer card that gives them tax back or whatever it does. So yeah, absolutely. Somebody was also talking about, I can't remember who it was, talking about charity shops, and now we're seeing charity shops not as the place to go if you haven't got any money, but the place to go if, you know, you want some good clothes that are relatively cheap. We were in St Andrews the other week and they were talking about the fact that when the students leave St Andrews, particularly the students, the foreign students, they leave all their clothes behind. So the charity shops are full of really good stuff. So I'm planning on, I think it might be kind of May, to head up to St Andrews and stalk the charity shops.
Really full of stuff that you don't actually need, Jane. That's the thing. I know I've got a wardrobe full of shirts and I hardly ever wear a shirt nowadays. So it's like a very, very rare occasion that I wear a shirt, and it's like, you know, a wardrobe of shirt and ties that never see the light of day anymore. So yeah.
But it's great if you can sell stuff that you don't use anymore. Somebody else will want it and you get that money for it. You don't have to pay any commission or anything like that. It's just, you know,
somebody was telling me the story about they put a pair of shorts up in Vinted for like £2, and somebody came back and said, oh, I'll pay you £1.33. And they're like, no, I want £2. If you're getting a pair of shorts, you're going to pay me the £2. So yeah, there's a bit mad thing, but there is a huge, we talked about this last episode about the fabrics and textiles. You know, there's a huge issue with clothing and environmental impact and what we're actually doing with the textiles that, you know, at the moment we're dumping them in developing world in Africa and so on, not really doing anything. So the whole fast fashion things, you know, got to change really, but then that'll decimate the high street even further than it's probably decimated already. But anyway, The other one I picked up on was that wet wipes containing plastic have to be banned from sale in the UK. Goodness knows why it's taken us this long to work that one out, but you know, I think if you've never been around a sewage works, you would be astounded and amazed at the crap that people flush down a toilet.
Was that not the idea?
Well, there's that. But the crap and nonsense that should not be flushed down the toilet, like, for example, cotton buds and various wet wipes containing plastic and so on. Because most sewage works have a system at the front end to sort of remove all that horrible stuff. The reality is they don't always remove it, and then obviously that sewage gets treated, goes into rivers, goes into the seas, and it's sort of long overdue. So hopefully, I don't know when the ban's to come in, but there is a ban. There is a plan for a ban, and I think some retailers, I can't actually remember which retailers, some have already sort of banned from selling in their own shops and so on. So there we go.
I think there are alternatives, aren't there, which they're saying are biodegradable, and even and that kind of thing. But again, it's what's biodegradable and what's the word, sort of degrades in the water. It could be biodegradable, but it still might, kind of clog up the sewage system. I think there was something a while back, one of the sewage systems went down because it was clogged with a massive ball of fat, grease and wet wipes.
But it's the wet wipes. It's similar to the wet wipes that start it, and then the grease and fat builds up behind it, and you get these what they call fatbergs. And,
that's it.
We probably need to get one of these contractors, one of these drainage contractors on the podcast. Actually, that'd be a good one.
Oh my goodness! Can you imagine what they could tell us? I don't know whether I want to hear it.
There we go.
Yeah, on top of that, we talked about the big plastic count, didn't we? Because some of the guys in the office were going to do the big plastic count.
I failed miserably. I meant to do the big plastic count, and I failed miserably to do it. But some people in the office did do it.
Yeah, I didn't. I was on holiday, but that was my excuse anyway.
Could have still done it on holiday, I think, Jane.
I don't think, okay, fair enough. It wasn't one of my top things to do when I was on holiday in Dubai. Did I tell you I was on holiday in Dubai?
Yes, we have.
Moving on. So we've actually got, I think it was like nearly 225,000 people took part in the big plastic count. 4,639,685 bits of plastic in a single week. That's a lot of plastic, isn't it? Apparently the UK tops the charts for plastic waste per person globally, second only to the US. Oh, for goodness sake. We're throwing away an estimated 1.7 billion pieces of plastic a week. That's over 90 billion pieces of plastic a year. You just kind of think, but everything's plastic, isn't it? I mean, you can't get away from it. You can't get away from it.
Is this the public's fault or is this the retailer's fault?
Well, yeah, I mean, you can't get away from plastics, everything. I mean, I look in my bin, right, and I recycle the majority of stuff that I can, but it's still all plastic packaging in the bin because we haven't got any flexible packaging recycling at the moment. So you can't, you can try to a point, but if it's packaged in that, there's not a lot you can do about it.
I got a row, just talking about bins, Jane. I got a row because I made a mistake in either the last episode or the episode before, because I mentioned that South Ayrshire bin collection, the residual waste bin collection, was every 4 weeks, and somebody reminded me that it's actually every 3 weeks. So there you go. There's
Alistair, that's big shocking.
I should know my fingers better, but so there's my almost apology.
Well, do you know, I'm still looking out of the door to see what bins my neighbours have put out, because I went on the council website and I still
need a bin app. You need a bin app. Where are you?
East Renfrewshire
East
Council.
Renfrewshire needs a bin app to help Jane out with her.
I call out because I went on the website and still couldn't find out what bins it was the next week. So, definitely. They didn't even give me a calendar. Usually they give us a calendar. All that extra money spent on that. And I've spent £52.50 on me brown bin thingy. Anyway, never mind.
Well, that reminds me, as some listeners may know, we introduced the bin app to Dundee City Council just at the start of the year, and it's going well. Lots of downloads, lots of positive feedback from everybody. But the local STV News decided to run a bit of a piece saying, why did the council spend so much money in the bin app? Now, what they failed to realise was there's something like 60 odd or 70,000 households in Dundee, and previously or at the moment still they're still sending a calendar to every household. And if you've looked at the price of a stamp, even a second class stamp, something like 78 pence or something. So It's costing the council about 60 grand to send out calendars, and the bin apps cost them probably about a third of that. So there wasn't really a story there. But it's,
No.
and it's just quite interesting how reporting seems to be so negative. We seem to always want to go for the negative rather than going for the sort of positive. That, you know, Dundee's try to do something positive. They're trying to, you know, inform the public. You know, they can, using the app, they can find out which bin to put materials in. They've got the calendar on their phone, all these benefits, and instead they're going for the negative. That, you know, as you say, you're having to print out a calendar, Jane, and stick it in your fridge or whatever. Whereas nowadays we can have that on our phone.
Yeah, I can't even print it out because I can't work out on the website where it says it is.
I'm sure there'll be a place to put your postcode in and print
well,
it out.
I did. I put my postcode in it, and it said, sorry, come back later, or something like that. Anyway, never mind.
All right. Good luck. Just keep following your neighbours in. They'll work out. Anyway, the last bit of news I had, and it's a slight tangent, was one of the podcasts I listened to called Leading. And a fairly recent one, episode 69, was by a guy called Dieter Helm, who is a leading energy economist in the UK. So it was all about energy transition, zero waste, all that type of stuff. Some really interesting stuff in there, and just in terms of how challenging the whole carbon issue is. You know, a couple of things he talked about was, you know, UK is sort of claiming that they're reducing their carbon impact, but in reality we're doing that by deindustrialization. So we're closing places like petrochemicals at Grangemouth, we're closing steelworks. You know, that material is still getting produced worldwide. And one of his arguments was that we should really be charging a carbon tax. So everything that gets imported. So yes, we can produce steel in China, but when it comes into UK, we've got to charge a carbon tax in there. So yes, we were talking about fashion earlier on. So yes, you can import a T-shirt for £2, but when it comes into the UK, the carbon tax is applied to it. And his logic is that would level things up and actually really make us start taking into account, you know, the impact some of our, you know, purchases are making on an environment. But it was really interesting about how everybody's just got to do their bit. Britain's not going to change it on their own. You know, there's a worldwide issue, but, you know, to sit there and say Britain can't do anything because, you know, the rest of the world's causing the problem is sort of wrong. And this argument is, you know, everybody should be doing their bit in terms of not flying off to Dubai every year for your holidays, Jane. That was one of the ones he did. He was very, very strong about it. He was like, the carbon emissions from flights is horrendous, and we should all be looking. And I'm guilty as anybody. I've, you know, been abroad already this year. You know, his argument was, you know, people should really be considering how many flights they take if they want to reduce their carbon impact. So there's some really interesting stuff, probably some contentious stuff in there, but well worth a listen. So we'll put a wee link in the show notes to it.
Okay, so it's my next listen to, is it my next podcast to listen to? And then I'll be like, no, I can't go anywhere. I've got to stay at home and reduce my carbon. Anyway, Albion news, Alistair, moving on from holidays. We've got some training courses coming up. So we've got a 2-day training course next week, Monday and Tuesday, on working with waste management. So it's all about waste management legislation. It's all about how you deal with waste management. It talks about hazardous waste. We talk about transport of dangerous goods, hazardous waste. We talk about all sorts of stuff. So that's next week. We've got quite a few people on that. We've even had to expand and use a new training venue, haven't we, Alistair?
Yep, we've got, I think it's a not-for-profit housing association just across the road from us. They have a very nice training room that I've eyed up for a few years, and it looks like they've got a bit more room, so it's a bit more comfortable. So we're going to use that as a venue for the training. So
that's good.
Hopefully a bit more comfortable for candidates and so on, because we can handle some in the office here, but once we get above about 10, it gets a bit tight and a bit claustrophobic for people spending a couple of days in the office. So yep, that's all good.
Thursday the 16th of May, we've got a one-day training course, which again is more of an introduction to waste management. And you can book that through our website and call us. And so, like I say, we've got a nice training venue at the Albion offices, and we have another one across the road. So we have all sorts of options.
Perfect. A couple of safety related things. So WISH, Waste Industry Safety and Health Forum, they've issued quite a few things recently that people in the waste industry are not aware of. There's one about automatic bin lifts. So that's a guidance note about the fact that too many staff get dragged into the back of a bin lorry and quite often get injured. There's a safety alert regarding hydraulically operated equipment, and in particular rear doors, and particularly for people if they need to work under the doors and so on. So that's well, if you've got that type of equipment, it's well worth a look. And they've just launched one about household waste recycling centre safety. And just linking back to your training, Jane, we do a course specifically for household waste recycling centre operative staffs. And what we'll probably need to do is look at the course and just make sure the new WISH stuff's incorporated into that for future. But we'll put the links to all these in the show notes.
Okay, no worries with that one. We've also got a couple of new things as well. We've got Susan Deakins just started. She started last week. So she's going to be helping out with all the training and coordinating it. So that's what she's doing. Also, Mia, our youngster, has got us on TikTok now. So we need to, if you want to have a look at the latest TikTok, where it's a meet the staff. So we did Kirsty last week. We've got Yaz this week, and one of Yaz's questions was, who's the most likely person to sit and do a Teams call in their pajamas? So if you want to find out who that is, you can have a listen to our TikTok. And we've got Alistair's on next week, so that'll be interesting. Alistair on TikTok.
No, I'm not even on TikTok yet. I believe I need to log on to TikTok to see.
You need to get with the youngsters, Alistair. You know?
We do share it on our Facebook and stuff like that as well. So there we go. Anyway, so I think that's all. Just a general shout out for myself and Jane. Were back at the CRWM event last week, and it's quite interesting talking to people about the podcast and love ideas for new guests. If you know people that you think, if you're one of the people that you think, well, why am I not been on yet? Or somebody that'd be quite good and interesting. We are trying to get as varied as possible in terms of different aspects of the sector, different levels within the sector. I was looking at our age profile again the other day. We seem to have drifted towards the old fogies again, so maybe we need to get a few young people on to sort of get the age thing back into the younger generation. So any ideas for guests, give us a shout, drop us a note. I'm sure you can find us by now. And just finally, introduction to Craig Chandler. So I've known Craig for probably 20 odd years, probably about 24 years. So I've known him for a long time, worked with him for a long time. Quite a lot of people in the industry know him. It's amazing his transition from coming into the industry not knowing anything to in many cases particularly health and safety, clinical waste, that type of thing, he is viewed as certainly by myself and quite a few other people, is if we have a problem or we've got a question we don't know the answer to, Craig's our man that we phone and drop in an email and say, what do you think about this? And 9 times out of 10, he'll know the answer. If he doesn't know the answer, he'll go away and find the answer for us, which is a great asset. And he's got an interesting story about where he's moving to. So if you don't know that story, then listen out for Craig and myself and Jane.
Hi, Craig. Lovely to see you. It's nice to have you here on our podcast. We're kind of going to go through lots of questions, 20 questions, and we know you've got lots of stories. So we're after all your stories, Craig. So the first one, I'm not quite sure I've got the whole hour to do it, but can you tell us about your current work and sort of background about what you've been doing and, the organisation. Well, I say the organisation you work for, but you can add a bit of Albion in that if you like.
No problems. Thanks for that. Thanks for having me. So currently work for myself, self-employed. The business is myself and my wife, Marion, C&M Training. And without sort of getting ahead of my time, because I want to talk about this a bit later on, I was encouraged to set up my own business in order to help Alistair out at some stage. And I effectively set up the business initially doing sort of waste management work, if you will, mostly for Albion, but as time progressed, that sort of expanded into other areas and other industries. So for my sins, I am a sort of chartered health and safety manager, chartered waste manager, and a dangerous goods safety advisor. So it allows me to do
Craig, a wee correction there. You're not a chartered waste manager. You're something else. There was a recent announcement.
Oh yeah, I forget. Sorry, I'm a chartered fellow.
You're a fellow of the Chartered Institute of Waste Management, is I think how you meant to describe it.
Right, yeah. Must get used to that.
Excellent.
Yeah, so
he's a jolly good fellow.
Thank you. But it just allows me to effectively work across a number of sectors rather than just doing the waste. That is still my bread and butter, to be fair, and still tied in a lot with what Albion does.
So a lot of the training you do, Craig, what kind of training is that? What does that involve? Because I know, from what I've experienced with yourself, it's quite a wide variety of training that you've been doing in your business.
And so it's one of those things. So I put down on my sort of CV and everything, sort of I deliver training both from entry level for the guys coming into the industry, as modern apprentices or whatever, as refuse collection operatives or street cleansers, all the way up through to being guest lecturers at things like the University of Western Scotland on their masters and stuff like that. So it's a massive sort of spread of different sort of topics and subjects that we do training with. Some are very practical, things like first aid and manual handling and sort of fire wardens, that type of stuff, and obviously some of it more sort of if you will, technical, if you will, like some of the waste stuff, particularly things like healthcare waste. I do quite a lot of work with the NHS when it comes to sort of training managers on how to manage healthcare waste.
Yes, I think you're my guru on healthcare waste and anything to do with dangerous goods safety advisor. That's you as my mentor, Craig.
I think he's a few people's mentors for clinical waste and ADR.
I must admit, I used to get some strange phone calls or sort of strange emails and everything. And again, without sort of going into sort of too many details, because I'm not sure if I'll upset somebody, I got one during the monkeypox, and it was from one of the waste managers from a hospital which will name nameless, asking me if it was okay, because they'd been told that they had a contaminated mattress with obviously a Cat A, highly infectious mattress, and was it okay to cut it up into 60-litre bits so they could put it into the containers and stuff. So you do get some quite strange things coming through. Obviously the answer to that was no, by the way, if anyone's interested.
Just checking.
Don't do that.
But the answer at that time was leave it in place, because there was no way of dealing with it at the time, wasn't it?
Yeah, I think that's ultimately what it was, is at that particular time the largest sort of approved container for category A substances, because they weren't really thinking about mattresses, was 60 litres. So the NHS had access to 60-litre containers, but thinking, how do I get a large mattress into a 60-litre container? And somebody had advised this guy, well, just chop it into smaller pieces. And he thought, I'll just check.
Yeah, it's good job he checked.
Thankfully, he checked, and I was like, no, please don't do that. And again, it took a little bit of negotiation, so I had to speak to the Department of Transport and stuff like that, explain the problem, and eventually we came up with a solution. And just as we came up with the solution, the government downgraded monkeypox from a Cat A to a Cat B, so it solved the problem anyway.
Yeah, it was costing a fortune, wasn't it?
It was going to cost a lot of money, so so we'll just downgrade it.
There you go. I hesitate to ask the next question, Craig, because I have a feeling I know what the answer might be. But the question I've got for you is, tell us what brought you into the world of waste management, and did you mean to get into waste management?
Well, there's a funny story this, and it involves you, Alistair.
Thought it might.
So the easy answer to that is no, I didn't want to come into the waste sector, and I sort of fell into it. So to give people that don't know me the background, in February 2000, I just left the army after a 16-year career in the military, and I was looking at my sort of skills and thought, what can I do? And within the army, I was an engineer in the army, so a civil engineer basically. So I thought, my effectively took my military job and transferred it into Civvy Street. It'd be like a site agent on a building site. But I thought to myself, I don't really know about that, because in the military we don't work with budgets, we don't work with, HR's a lot easier. If the work's not done, no one goes home, etc. That type of stuff. So I thought maybe I haven't got the experience to do it, but I can drive a crane or I can drive a lorry. So I went looking through the job adverts, and I applied to a local construction company as a job as either a tipper driver or as a crane driver. So obviously they looked at that, and I think they looked at all my background qualifications and said, no, we don't want to use them as that, but we've got a job as a skip controller. So sort of running the transport side for the skip business for Barr Environmental, of which Alistair was the manager at the time. And so they sort of rang me and said, look, we'd like you to apply for this. Would you do it? And I didn't really want to do it. So I made up a story saying that I couldn't make the interview. However, if they had a job driving a lorry and everything, please keep in touch. And then they rang back about an hour later and said, we've changed the interview date. And I thought, oh, well, I can't use the same excuse. I'll just go. So I remember sort of turning up, and I thought, well, I don't really want the job, so I'll just be brutally honest. So I think some of the questions were things like, what do you know about tachographs and all the rest of it? To which the answer is nothing. And then there was stuff about, we're trying to modernise and put, stuff onto a computerised system. What do you know about computers? To which the answer was nothing. Picture my surprise when I was still offered the job after such a sterling interview. So I got offered the job, but I don't think it was Alistair that wanted me.
I think, if truth be told, Barr at the time was quite good at employing military people, and two of the HR people were brigadiers or whatever the level was, and I think they'd checked out your military career and seen some positives. I think it was them that got you suitably employed.
They were looking for the potential there, Craig.
Absolutely.
They saw the potential.
Absolutely.
They spotted something. And you never, like, how, just going back in time, you were a Barr you must have been a Barr for 4 or 5 years?
No, I was only there for 2 years.
2 years?
Only 2 years, yeah. I ended up leaving probably not long after you. There was, without getting technical and all the rest of it, I realised, because I used to do all the wages, that I was the lowest paid person on the site, including the litter pickers. And I was the COTC holder for a landfill site and 2 transfer stations, and I was getting paid the least amount of money because I was salaried and I had to work overtime, so I was working every Saturday completely unpaid. And when I asked for a pay rise, they said no. So I thought, you know what, I'm not going to stick around. And I ended up moving to another company to do an assistant manager job, which was on double the wages.
There you go. I did always feel a bit guilty, Craig, leaving you with accepting foot and mouth ash from the burn sites, which I managed to escape by a few weeks before it arrived in the site. So just after I put my notice in, the Scottish Government insisted that the site in Ayrshire took the ash from some of the foot and mouth sites, which at the time Ayrshire was free from foot and mouth, wasn't it? So it was quite controversial at the time. But I managed to leave before all that excitement.
It caused a lot of issues, with the locals and stuff like that. And yeah, it was my first experience of seeing the powers of the vets, the state veterinary services. I think they would have been in those days, as part of MAF. And yeah, effectively dispatching SEPA off the site, told them not to come back until they were allowed, etc., etc. Any time it was like, oh, we're running out of driver's hours, just pull the tachos out of the cabs, ignore the driver's hours, just keep driving, all this sort of stuff. So the amount of rules that they could just change, I was very, very surprised. The amount of powers they could wield, was quite a shock to me, to be honest. Because I initially didn't want to run it, because I knew that when it had finished, our neighbours would still hate us at the end of the day, because they would blame us for any issues that went on, and they wouldn't believe the fact that we were forced to do it. But I was effectively told if I didn't run the site, they would call the army in and get the army to run it. So I thought, well, if we're going to have to do it, I'd rather we had the guys in and sort of know what they're doing. So, but yeah, thanks for that, Alistair. I forgot about that.
Yeah. No, I remember vividly getting the first phone call. I was sort of 7:30 in the morning, and the vet from the female vet, I can't remember her name, phoned me and asked if we'd consider taking the ash from the burn site. And at the time, our position was we're not in a foot and mouth zone, therefore we don't want to bring, potentially bring a risk into the area. And she was insistent, and I eventually said to her, I said, what happens if we say no? And she never even paused. She just said, we'll bring in an army and we'll run the site for you. And the decision was making, we're not letting them run the site. We'll keep running it and charge plenty, which is probably what, Barr was particularly good at. So, no, it was interesting. It was interesting, but it was interesting times back then with the burn sites.
Well, it was quite strange because we ended up many weeks into it, and we had all the protesters outside the front, and they were throwing rocks through your car windscreen and stuff like that, all in front of the police, who sat and did nothing. So I ended up having a major bust up with the police officers there because they just sat and watched, and I ended up ringing the chief constable, I think, for Strathclyde Police, and asking why his police officers were sitting watching people commit a crime and not doing anything. So of course the police then got upset with me, and then I got stopped every night going home by the police, who did checks on my car and all the rest of it, just to let me know that they were not happy that I complained about them. So yeah, and then in the end, I think if I remember rightly, the politician in the area was Cathy Jameson from Scottish Labour, I think.
Could have been.
And
yep.
she hadn't said a word for about 4 or 5 weeks when all this was going on. And at the time, she was waiting to be approved for her position as the Deputy First Minister. And literally the day after she got approved as Deputy First Minister, she then turned up on the site and started giving it, this is disgraceful, this shouldn't have happened, etc., etc. She didn't want to rock the boat because it was her boss's idea to use our site. So until she got a promotion, she wasn't saying anything. But as soon as she got promoted, she came on the site, of course, with all the press and stuff like that, saying, this is disgraceful, this shouldn't happen, you shouldn't be allowed to do this. And I think I pointed out to her, where have you been for the last 4 weeks? To which Mr. Guzzin was not very happy. At the end of the day, my boss was not particularly happy. But at the end of the day, it was like the whole politics of that thing was, I think as a private company, we were left to take all of the grief that came with that, and with no real support from any of the people that sort of told us to do it, whether that be, the Scottish government or whatever. So yeah, but again, lessons learnt, moving forward.
Oh,
so
certainly.
What year was that
certainly
then? So when was that?
That would have been 19. What would that have been? 19,
no, 2001. 2001.
As late as that?
Really?
Yeah, 2001. So it's quite strange because one of the funny stories that I told on my my Chartered Fellow interview relates to that. It was a case of I had to write this safe system work for getting this ash into the site, and they were still worried that there may be some form of transmission. And so what they'd done is they burnt all the stuff down in the freeze or whatever, and they put it into these 1-ton flexible IBCs. They're sort of the bags you get gravel in at Juicens or whatever, and they would get delivered, and they wouldn't get tipped because they were all sealed, and they would get lifted off, and we would have to sort of bury them. So I had to sort of do a sort of safe system work and work out how deep you'd need to bury them so that when we drove over the top of the waste, we wouldn't burst the bags. Now, despite being a sort of engineer by trade, maths was never my strong point. So I was trying to do the calculations to work out, and of course all the calculations are based on soils and stuff like that. So waste is, doesn't have, anything sort of written down. So I had to do quite a lot of guessing, to be honest. And in the end, I thought, I don't know how to do this. And I remembered up in my attic, I had an old pamphlet, which was a military engineering pamphlet about field defences. And it basically stated that if you put 45 centimetres of soil on top of basically a plastic sheet, it would support the weight of, a tank going over the top of it, and, will survive a close miss from 105 artillery shell. So I just basically copied it from that. And that now apparently is now in the standard thing which we use for burying infected ash, because no one ever actually checked where I got these calculations from. They just assumed I must have done it properly, and it's now written down there. It's like this, moving forward, if we're going to bury the stuff, you always bury it 0.45 meters below the waist and everything. To be fair, it worked. You know, we put it in, and
nobody came and blew it up, so you're all right.
Absolutely.
So, but it does make you laugh about. He was like, "Oh yeah, just go and do that. Yeah, it must be right." Not one person asked me how I came to that conclusion.
Yes. So, apart from that, any favourite roles or projects you've had over the years?
I think really the one big favourite job has been working out in the Republic of Serbia. So I did a work for the European Union as a consultant on a healthcare waste project, and I think I listened to the very first podcast, Alistair, with you, and I think you were telling your advice for the people coming in is to look to the emerging, other countries. That's where the real difference can be made, and I think that's the reason why it's my favourite job, because often in the UK you do stuff and you don't see any improvements, you don't see any benefit, if you know what I mean. So there's a lot of work and nothing seems to change. But I was there for 5 years on and off over 2 different projects. And if you look at the photographs and when we first turned up and they had nothing from a point of view of all these hospitals producing infectious materials, which were just going into open skips in the car park, where the local gypsies, the Roma people, would then climb in there, try and find the needles, wash the needles, and then sell them back to the health service for use on the next patient. This was what it was like when we first got there. And then, the EU obviously donated a lot of equipment. And obviously one of my jobs was to help set the system up and then train the people to use it. And then when I left there, it was a fully functioning, system that was working really, really well. In fact, in some ways, when I went to do stuff a few years ago for NHS Scotland, in some ways it was probably better than what we were using in Scotland, because again, they didn't take it for granted. The people there knew we've been given this opportunity. It's going to be a massive improvement to our environment, to our way of life, and the health and safety. When I first got there, I'd interview the cleaners and stuff, and they were getting something like 30 needle stick injuries a day. Every day they were being stabbed by needles because they were getting put in plastic bags, black plastic bags. Do you know what I mean? So by putting all these systems in place and everything, they could see this, an advantage in it for them. And because of that, they embraced it wholeheartedly. And the system was pretty much up and running. It was really, really good within 5 years. So I have to say probably that's my favourite one, just because of how easy it was to tell, the improvements that occurred over quite a short space of time.
I think the advantage you had there was you were pretty much starting from scratch, weren't you? You were able to say, right, this is the equipment we've got. This is how we need to get the material, the clinical waste to the system. This is what we need to do with the product. You were almost starting with a clean sheet, which probably at the time was quite difficult, but also in a way helped you because you were able to sort of decide in the system and agree the system and put it in place to suit.
No, it's absolutely, and like all these things, it was a team effort, and the team from the EU, it was a sort of multinational team of people picked with different skills and everything. And I learned a tremendous amount from people. So a lot of the guys would be German, Dutch, Danish, or even some of the guys from the Balkans, Macedonians and stuff like that. And everybody does something well. Do you know what I mean? And the trick is to find that thing that someone does well and say, right, we're going to copy that. So it was a case of having all those people there that could sort of learn off each other and stuff like that. So I learned a tremendous amount, but I was also quite disappointed as well, because I remember when I managed to get the job, and I thought to myself, that's me, I've made it. You think yourself, you become a consultant and all the rest of it, you think, yeah, that's good, people listen to you. But then when you become an international consultant, that's like, oh, that makes it better. And when I first got there, some of the guys I was working with, without being rude, were not particularly good, and I was a bit surprised. I remember speaking to the boss, who was a Dutch guy called Jan Tessink, fantastic bloke, and I said to him, I don't really understand this. If these are international consultants, I expected them to know more. And I remember him saying to me, because he'd been an international consultant for about 40 years or something in all these different countries, he says, Craig, what you need to remember is to class yourself an expert, you only need to know a little bit more than the people around you. He says, and because the people here don't know anything, anyone that knows a slight thing is classed as an expert. He says, it's much harder to be an expert in your own country where lots of people know lots of stuff at the end of the day. And I thought to myself, do you know what, that's right. But in my head, I had this vision of, there was like a ranking, if you know what I mean. And if you got to work internationally, you must be right at the top end. But yeah, unfortunately, a lot of the people you do meet there are probably not, the best for that particular job at the end of the day. Because some of the stuff you do and you're thinking that's not really helping here, but I think it's like all these things that, because it's like being invited to a party. Once you've been invited once, you get invited back again. At the end of the day, the first thing is getting that initial invite. So you find it's the same people, effectively doing the same projects all over. And I think they just become very much like copy paste. Go to a different country, copy and paste what we've done. And sometimes that works, and other times it's like, well, no, that's not going to fit into here. You need to have a rethink. But I do think, looking back, there was an awful lot of that going on.
Yeah. Yeah, well, we can class ourselves as international consultants as well, can't we, Alistair?
Or?
Well, international consultants. You've worked in
No,
Congo. I've worked in Hong Kong.
I've not actually worked in Congo. I've spent loads of time and wasted loads of money going to Congo, but I've never actually earned a pound. So I think the definition of a consultant is being able to earn a bit of money from doing that type of work. So
oh, well, just me and Craig then.
I was maybe a volunteer consultant. So I did at one time nip out and see Craig and see all the good work in Serbia, which was quite fascinating. So yeah.
So we've kind of gone through your favourite project. What about your worst project or your disastrous project, or any funny stories apart from the shocking?
I've got quite a few funny stories. I don't think there's many I can actually
repeat.
I can probably repeat at the end of the day. But one of the funniest ones that sticks in my mind was, as part of the sort of healthcare waste project out in Serbia, we obviously were working with the vets. So it wasn't just looking after the hospitals and all the rest of it. So one of the things that the EU had sort of donated to the Serbian veterinary service, if you will, was like a sort of portable incinerator. It was a fantastic bit of kit. So it was sort of, in a 40-foot shipping container that could go on the back of a lorry and get demounted anywhere. You would put the chimney up and all that type of stuff. And the idea to allow them to burn, sort of small animals like sheep or goats or something like that in case there was a foot and mouth outbreak or something like that. So of course, one of my jobs was to help them. The manufacturer of the bit of kit actually did the training on how to use it, but I was helping them to set up the systems and how you would, how you do all this sort of stuff. So we did all this and all of, thought nothing of it. And I get a phone call months later from these two vets that I'd done some training with, and they're like, Craig, we've got a problem with the incinerator. And I thought, well, if it's a technical problem, we can just fob this off to the manufacturer. But no, the problem was they had a dead giraffe, and they wanted to know how they could get the dead giraffe into a very, very small combustion chamber, because obviously it was only sort of designed for like goats and sheep and things like that. And it's like they got this. So I did think it was strange that they were out on the Pannonian plain of the Balkans, which is like the big flat area where they grow like a third of the world's raspberries or whatever. Not quite sure what a giraffe was doing on there or whatever. I never really managed to get to the bottom of that story, but it ended up being a sort of very strange phone call about me trying to tell them how to chop this giraffe up into small pieces so they could burn it a bit of a time. So that's not a conversation you normally have over a telephone, I would imagine.
No, I must admit, I've never had a conversation about burning a giraffe. You're right.
Chop it up first before you burn it.
Poor giraffe. So in terms of your role working in the waste industry, and you're probably going back a bit of time to remember this, Craig, have your opinions changed, your opinions about waste and resources and how we should manage resources, has that changed over time? And how do you feel about public engaging, whether the public are engaging or not engaging with doing what they need to do?
I think my opinion and attitude has changed tremendously in 24 years. Because I knew nothing about waste, hence my interview, my job interview. What do you know about this? Nothing. So I knew nothing about waste, and it was one of those things, like most people, out of sight, out of mind. Put it in a bin. Someone takes it away. So obviously working in all these facilities and stuff like that, you start to see, not just what works and what doesn't work, but you often see the effects of bad decisions as well. Do you know what I mean? Which I probably wouldn't have done had I not sort of joined the industry. Now, you'll remember this, Alistair, very much, when I first joined the industry, back in 2000, the old saying about the solution to pollution is dilution at the end of the day. And some of the things that we did, which we now look back at and say, that would be the completely wrong thing to do. So one of the big things that I sort of bang on about when I speak to people and all the rest of it, particularly if they talk about, I was painting my house the other day and had a little bit of paint left over. And you're like, well, what did you do with the paint? It was only a little bit. So I poured it down the drain. Do you know? And I would sit there and say, well, no, you shouldn't be doing that. And they were saying, I know I shouldn't be doing it, but it's only a little bit. And I would sit there and say, how many millions of people in the UK are painting their houses in the summertime? I says, if all those little bits and you add loads of millions to it, it's no longer a little bit. And they all sit and look at you and go, do you know what? I never thought of that. But they're not thinking about your next door neighbour. So, the one thing I would say that I've done at home is, even those small quantities that I would normally have poured down the drain and everything, it doesn't get done now. Effectively, I'm causing the council a hassle now by taking it into the recycling centres and stuff like that. But again, you've got to practice what you preach. Do you know what I mean? So I think the big thing about the big change I've done is to act locally but think globally. So to give you an example, I'm very, very lucky in the fact I live out in the country. So I've got a really big garden. So one of the things that obviously we have is,
you've got forest. You've not just got a big garden. You've got a forest.
Got a forest as well, yes. So one of the things that I did was, before the food waste collection came in, I was looking how much food waste we were putting in the bin, and you're thinking, well, how much carbon is going into effectively transporting that, and all this sort of stuff, and thinking, well, what can I do? So, we try to minimize as much what waste as you can, but you're still going to produce some. And so I started doing composting. So all the stuff that wasn't cooked was getting composted in my garden. It's got massive area, so I could just set some composting up with the grass cuttings and stuff. And then all the stuff that was sort of cooked that you couldn't put into compost, because it would encourage rats and everything. I bought myself, and I'm not trying to advertise here, a solar digester, a green cone, which I put in, and effectively all the sort of dog poo and all the cooked food and everything just goes into this sort of dustbin that's sort of half buried in the ground, and obviously the sun heats it up, and below the ground you've got like a mesh basket, so all of the stuff goes into there, but it allows things like the worms come through and everything, so all the nutrients are going into your soils and everything, but without increasing rats or smell and all the rest of it. It's a fantastic bit of kit. It's been in my garden probably for about 17 years, and I've never ever had to move it. Because I think the idea is, as long as you don't overfill it and give it plenty of time for the worms to come in and remove the stuff away, below ground level where you don't see it. And you just think, how many tons of biodegradable material have I removed from back of a lorry, a bin lorry, going to a landfill site, or even going to an AD plant? At the end of the day, there's still a huge amount of sort of carbon associated with that. And you think, if I can do that, there's loads of other people that have got gardens that could do something similar. And actually, what made it even better was the fact that the council, they sponsored people to use these, so the actual cost of it was peanuts. I think it was like a tenner or something like that, because I think at the time South Ayrshire Council had bought them, and then they said, look, if you want them, because I don't know how much they cost, but let's say they were 100 quid. I don't know if that's accurate or not, but they were subsidising it, because effectively they're thinking long term, if all of these people do this, how much tonnage will be taken off our, and I don't think, because I think at Walker Road there was thousands of them sitting there.
It's absolutely true. You're reminding me of Laura Young, who had her wormery in her flat in Dundee or wherever she stayed. Yeah. But I think that's one of the issues going on at the moment. So many of the councils are now charging for garden waste collections, but they're doing so little to encourage home. Go back 15, 20 years ago, you could get either a free or a pick up a garden composter for buttons from the council, and that was to try and get people to compost what they could in the garden rather than paying for a collection, which environmentally makes lots and lots of sense. But instead what we've done is we've started charging for a brown bin collection, and then that just goes in the residual bin. And then it's not improved any. So it's back to this, you do what you can do in your own area. You think about my house or whatever, what can I do here? And you can, and everyone's circumstances are different, so it's not suitable for everybody. But if you can do it, then why not do it? You're making me, you just chuckled there about the wormery, because I'm sure Marion's told you the story about what I got her for a birthday one year. I bought her a wormery for a birthday one year. She was not happy. Sure she was delighted.
Yeah. Unfortunately, I didn't do my research, and the one that I bought was very, 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 very good, but it was produced in Australia, and it never really survived a Scottish winter. So it sort of worked during the summer and winter time. I think all the worms died. I think they were froze to death or whatever. obviously don't get temperatures like that in Australia.
No,
So I've still got
yes.
it, but it's not being used at the end of the day. But to be honest, you know, I've got 3 huge composters going, and obviously the sort of green cone and everything, and very, very little from that sort of side of stuff from the garden and everything ends up going into the brown bin. You know what I mean?
So you don't have to pay for your brown bin. I've just paid £52.50 for my brown bin collection. I just got my sticker yesterday. I stuck it on and then read the instructions, and it said don't stick it over previous stickers. I was like, oh, right, too late.
Too late.
Come on, Jane, that's the basics. That's a man thing to do. Not read the instructions.
Well, yeah.
So how do you get away from? You mentioned your garden, Craig. How do you get away from work? How do you relax, or do you?
Yeah, well, yeah. Yeah, when I get a chance. No, I've got a camper van, and my real love is to go out in the camper van. So my wife and I will just pack up, you know, and go. We don't often go far, but you don't need to. You know, we maybe go down to Lochdoon, and just sort of park up for the weekend and just, you know, just sit there and just enjoy the nature while we still have it at the end of the day. So but we have been further afield as well. You know, we went down to, you know, sort of Devon and Dorset and stuff like that. So yeah, but predominantly we just use it locally. So that's what I really enjoy. But unfortunately I don't get, you know, I haven't used it as much as what I should have done, because there's always that little bit of extra work to do. There's always a deadline you've got to do, and these weekends that you're going to go away, you end up sort of working. So you know, I really do need to get better at the work-life balance thing.
Yeah, I'm dead jealous of your camper van. That's definitely my aim. You know, I keep saying I'm going to do it, and then when I retire, I'm going to get a camper van.
Just do it now, Jane.
Just do that. I said exactly the same as you. But, you know, I said every year. I mean, we put money aside. It was the camper van fund. We put money aside, and then every year something would come up. You know, the central heating system would break, or we need a new car. So every year we never, you know, and in the end I said, look, let's just borrow the money, buy it, because I'll be sitting at 70 still saying exactly the same thing. I want to buy myself a camper van. So we did it, and then obviously to make sure that we used it, we started off with this. And again, we started off saying, right, every weekend, or not every weekend, 1 weekend a month, we'll go somewhere, even if it's just 10 miles down the road. You know, to get, you know, because there's no point in having it, otherwise it becomes a very expensive car at the end of the day, a very big, unwieldy, expensive car. But yeah, I absolutely love going out in it, to be quite honest. And you know, we do occasionally stay in campsites, but a lot of the times what I love is the sort of, I don't know, there's controversial wild camping or whatever. You know,
it's not quite camping, as I know.
Well, it's not. Well, it isn't really, you know. But you get what I'm saying. It's parking up without.
It's parking your van up and having a wee sleep.
Yeah, having a wee
sleep. You know,
sitting at the side of the road. You know, watching the sunset or whatever over Lochdoon or whatever it might be. Or I love, you know, taking you know, like a little fire pit or whatever. And you know, sort of cooking food the old-fashioned way over wood and stuff like that. And again, even then, because as Alistair pointed out, you know, I own 3 acres of woodland next to the house, and every year when the storms come in, trees will come down. So again, I don't buy wood, or I don't cut trees down, but all the wood that goes, you know, for my sort of wood burning stove and everything, all comes from, you know, my own property and stuff like that.
Sustainable forest there, Craig.
Sustainable, yeah. That's the thing. So yeah, for all those people saying, oh, you shouldn't be burning wood, you know, it's come for miles and someone's had to heat it up and all the rest of it. It's like, no, it hasn't. It's come from about 100 yards away from my house. And it's been, you know, it's been sitting in my shed for the last 3 years drying or whatever. So
oh, you're ticking lots of these sustainability boxes, Craig.
And it's strange because, you know, you wouldn't really, you know, most people that know me wouldn't sort of they would never have me down as a tree hugger at the end of the day. You know, it's not how I come across. But, you know, I do genuinely have a passion for the environment and want to try and protect it.
I think you've got the most sustainable approach in the world, Craig, to your communication device.
Yes. If anybody knows Craig, he's got like the simplest phone you
Nokia
can never
phone.
get. Yes, I think we had those about 20 years ago.
Well,
Yeah,
weirdly
Craig
enough,
still got it.
well, yes, because if it's still working, why would I want to replace it at the end of the day? You know, I do think some of the issues we get, and it does frustrate me a little bit when you talk to younger people, and the younger people who blame the older generation for the state of the planet. And I'm thinking, so, well, I'm not being funny, but you're changing your mobile phone every 12 months. You know, you have loads of foreign holidays, etc., etc. You know, you want to look closer to home before you start throwing accusations around about, you know, other people ruining the planet and stuff. You know, I think I was doing induction at the Albion offices a while back, and one of the young MAs, the modern apprentices from one of the councils, was sitting there asking, "What's that?" I says, "That's my phone." "Is that a phone?" And we worked out that my phone was 3 years older than he was.
Oh my goodness.
He couldn't believe it was
yeah.
22 years old, my phone. It's like, "What? It's 22?" He goes, "Oh, I'm only 19.
Oh, bless. So we have quite an exciting future, Craig, in your new endeavour. Is that something you can tell us about in your new career?
Well, hopefully. Yeah, so I've accepted a new job. So I am just currently
I
waiting
hope you
for...
did better at the interview than your interview for Barr then.
Yeah, that's right.
Well, it was quite strange because I think that was my first interview since the Bar one, and it was like, you know, 23 years before or whatever, and it was a bit weird because I'd applied for the job and then I forgot about it. And the thing was, it said on the advert that if you don't hear within a week, you haven't been shortlisted. So I never heard anything, so just assumed, you know. And then what happened was, just before Christmas last year, you know, a very good friend of mine who I grew up with, his mother, you know, was getting to the stage where you know, she wouldn't last much longer. So I wanted to go and see her, you know, because I thought it might be my last opportunity to sort of see her before she died. And so I decided, she lived in Germany. She was a German lady. And so my good friend from my days at school said, well, I was going to visit Mamoni, why don't we go together? So I sort of drove down to his house, and we jumped into his car and we went across and spent a week in Germany, you know, ostensibly to see his mother, but also to go to, you know, the Christmas markets and stuff like that. And because of that, you know, I took Mary, my wife, with me, and I turned my phone off. And I said to Mary, we're not taking a computer, we're not taking any phones, we're just going to go and enjoy ourselves, cut ourselves off. And then when I landed back in the UK, got off the ferry, put my phone back on, and there was a message from the HR manager saying they're desperate to try and get hold of me for an interview. And I'm thinking, hang on a minute, this was like weeks and weeks and weeks after you said that, you know, if you've not heard anything, you're not going to go forward. But I think there'd been a mistake. So I ended up doing an interview while I was doing COTC cover for Barra Borough Council. So it was quite strange because obviously I turned up quite smart for once. And
Really?
I've never seen that, Craig.
And
No,
the site
me
manager
neither.
says, "Oh, what's going on here?" I says, "I'm just going to go up and use the office upstairs. Can you make sure no one disturbs me?" So strange enough, it came down about an hour later, and the guy says, "Well, you're in a job interview there." I was like, "How did you get that?" He goes, "Well, you just turned up smart, and you know, normally you don't bother going sitting upstairs or whatever." And I was getting a job interview, and again, I thought to myself, I'll just be brutally honest. And I think one of the questions was, you're obviously going to have to work with politicians. Do you feel that you'll have an issue communicating with politicians? And I think I said something along the lines of, I won't have an issue communicating with them, but they may have a problem with me at the end of the day. So what do you mean by that? I says, well, at the end of the day, I'm not known for my subtlety. So if I think if something is stupid and I don't think it'll work, then I'll just say it's stupid and it won't work or whatever. And I says, and sometimes people, you know, don't take that very well. I says, so you may as well know up front that that's who I am. You know, that's what you're going to get. And I think the lady that will be my boss, she was one of on the interview panel. I did see her smile when I say that. So I don't know if that's a good sign or a bad sign. And then about a week later, I got the job offer. So I will hopefully be the health and safety advisor for the Falklands Islands government. So moving away from waste back into back into health and safety.
Anything to do with waste then? No. So what does that cover?
So I don't know the change in it. The change in the role. I'm, you know, so traditionally I think the health and safety advisor has been in the sort of construction sort of side of stuff, you know, which sort of makes sense, you know, the people who build the roads on the island and stuff like that. And then I was told that there'd been a restructure and it was going to be part of corporate development or, you know, development. And I thought, well, that doesn't make any sense. And of course I then looked at, you know, all the people I'd be working with were all economists. So they're all economists, and they're all sort of environmental people. So I thought, well, it still seems a bit strange, but if that's what they want, that's absolutely fine. But because, you know, I'm all excited about going, I've started looking at Falkland Islands TV. So you can download it on YouTube. So I've been watching it. So you get like the news sort of a day later. And they were interviewing these two government officials, and they were talking about all of the, you know, development of the oil fields down there. And they were sitting there saying that obviously, you know, we've done all of the sort of work, and we're just moving forward and all the rest of it. But the first three things they need to look at was like, the first thing we need to look at is health and safety, and then it'll be environmental, and then it's to do with like mineral rights or something like that. So I suddenly went, bingo. Why is the health and safety person going into the development side of it rather than on the sort of, you know, working with the guys that are going to be doing? And I thought, oh, here we go. So I don't know, but I presume my first few years are going to be very, very much related to developing safety stuff for, you know, development of the oil fields off the coast of the islands, in the hope that they can obviously bring in another source of revenue into the economy, and obviously doing that in a safe way. Fortunately, I know nothing about offshore health and safety.
Well, you know.
You'll work out.
Yeah, I was going to
I'll manage to
say,
work it out.
I think you're very good at adapting and learning and everything like that from my experience with you. A quick question: how big is the Falkland Islands?
It's
Because
about,
like
it's the land surface of it's about the size of Wales, I think, with across all the islands. So if you add all the islands together, you know, I think there's like 3,000 islands or something like that. Obviously, a lot of them are very, very small. Yeah,
Wow.
a lot of them are very, very small. I think the main islands, you've got West Falkland and East Falklands and a couple of sort of fairly chunky ones off it. But there's only sort of 3,000 people who live on the island. So I think when I looked
at the population's quite small, isn't it?
It's the third least populated country in the world.
Wow, gosh, that's pretty.
But the first one is a bit of a cheat because that's the Vatican City, and I don't really think that's a country. I don't care what anyone says. That's a city.
Yeah, it's not really the same.
So it's a South Sea island. Vanuatu, I think, is number 2, and the Falkland Islands is number 3.
Wow.
So 3,000 people and tens of thousands of sheep.
3,000. Sorry, apologies. I'm using Google while we're talking here. According to Google, 3,801 people, which is equivalent to 5 times 10 to the minus 5 of the total world population.
Oh, well, you'll have 2 extra when you get there, Craig. So, you know, and a few dogs.
Yeah.
So, any fact you want to share from your job or sector that people might not know? Any kind of insights?
So the one that I'm going to come out with is one that I do when I do a lot of training.
I'm writing it down then.
Well, you'll know this one.
It.
You'll know this one.
If she was listening, Craig, if she was listening.
Yeah, you'll know this one. It'll be on one of the slides that you're updating at the moment. And again, and often I do training for people who work in the waste sector, and they're still usually very, very surprised when you come out with this. And I talk about, you know, how the road to hell can be paved with good intentions. Do you know? And you can come up with what you think is a good idea because you're looking at one particular thing, but no one's thought through the whole. And so one of the things that we sort of talk about was, you know, there's a huge, the world has got this huge thing like carbon at the moment, and like we must reduce carbon, etc., to the expense of all others or everything else. And to me, carbon, you know, I'm not saying it's not important, but it's nowhere near top of the list of things that are more important when it comes to the environment and stuff like that. And when you just look at one thing, so I'll give you an example. The European Union decided, you know, many years ago that in order to save electricity, which will reduce carbon, you know, they'll force everybody to use energy saving light bulbs. So the old CFLs, the compact fluorescent lamps. So effectively they were the little, you know, energy saving bulbs that take about half an hour to eventually warm up and stuff like that. But they use a lot less electricity and they last a lot longer. So you're getting sort of two benefits there. However, the downside to it is they all contain about 21 milligrams of mercury. And that mercury, and most people at the end of it, even though the councils offer recycling stuff, because they don't know this, they'll effectively put that bulb into their bin. So that bin then goes to the local landfill site. That bulb is then crushed, and that 21 milligrams of mercury, along with all the other bulbs in there, gets washed down into the leachate. Yeah, goes into the leachate treatment plant, goes through a process and gets turned into a different chemical, which is even more poisonous. methyl mercury, and then that is discharged legally into our rivers and streams. Yeah, so there's about 2,200 tons of mercury being, shipped into the environment every year from all of these sources at the end of the day. And actually now pretty much all of the, all of the decent food species of fish, you think about tuna, salmon, all the rest of it, are all completely contaminated now with heavy metals, including mercury. And it's a case of, in order to look at one problem, we've created a bigger problem at the end of the day without, so again, it's a shame we didn't miss the CFL bit out and go straight to LEDs at the end of the day. But, it's back to this. Sometimes when people just get one idea in their head, they don't think it all the way through. And again, the other issue is about I remember all the councils with their fleeces saying this fleece is made out of 20 recycled bottles. So we now know from research that a lot of the microplastics in the ocean has come from all this recycled clothing, where it gets washed in the washing machine and the microplastics get washed off it and then go into the seas and oceans, and that's causing an even bigger problem. So you know what I mean? So funny enough, I don't see many councils with guys walking around with a fleece saying I'm made from recycled bottles now. I wonder why that would be.
It's totally true what you're saying, Craig, and there are loads of commentators that yes, carbon's important, but habitat and the natural environment is equally, if not as important. And I've quite often had discussion, there's a bit of a thing at the moment with people they're anti-electric vehicles, that's not going to make a difference, blah blah blah, I don't need to change, and this, I'm all right Jack sort of attitude. And the sort of argument I always come back to, is it right that we're effectively destroying the habitat? You might not agree with global warming, you might think that's a load of nonsense, but at the end of the day, is it right that we're doing a pretty good job of wrecking the environment? And I think most people would say no, it's not right.
Yeah, it isn't.
But it's having that grown up conversation that I think the politicians can't really have, because it gets distilled down to, you can't have that complicated conversation about, we could do that would help, but the downside of that is X, Y, and Z, and we don't seem to be able to have that sort of complicated conversation these days.
I think ultimately, again, one of the sort of things when I sort of do this when I'm teaching and stuff is, when you look at sustainability, I always say, take it back to what people know and what they like. So it's like sitting in a bar. So people like going to bars and people like having a wee drink. So I'm sitting there saying, if you have a sustainable, planet, a sustainable workplace or whatever, think of that as a bar stool. And most bar stools will have 3 legs. Yeah. And for that bar stool to be effective and comfortable, those legs need to be the same size. Yeah. So if you think of one of those legs is the environment, and one is, social stuff, and then the other one is economic stuff. If you concentrate on one rather than the others, then you've got a wobbly bar stool, which ultimately is not sustainable to sit on. So if you just basically put your eggs into, let's make sure everyone's as rich as possible, and put everything into, the economy side of it, then you're still going to have a problem. But vice versa, if you put all your stuff into the environmental side of it, you're going to have an issue, because people still need places to live. You can't expect people to go backwards and live in caves and and all this sort of stuff. So what we've got to do is have this, as you say, a grown-up conversation about how do we have all of these 3 legs on the stool being treated equally, and contributing to a stable workplace, world, whatever you want to talk about it. And I just think that no one is willing to do that. All of the people, so you get all of the absolute mad capitalists who just care about the economic side of it, and then you'll get some of the equally just as mad people in the environmental sort of sector as well, just sitting there saying everything else should go, we should just worry about the environment. But in reality, all of these things they're all interlinked, and you need to make sure you're not ruining one to get the other one, if that makes sense.
You need to listen, Craig, to the TED talk about donut economics.
Donut economics.
Donut.
You remember this one, Jane?
Yes, I remember you telling me about it.
And this, and that's. I'm paraphrasing here, but that was exactly their principle, that the whole thing's got to interact, as you described there. So I can't remember. We'll need to dig out that podcast when we mentioned it, Jane, whether we could find it again. I think we could probably find a TED talk, actually. We could probably link to the TED talk, because it is out there. So there you go.
Uh-huh.
So Yeah. So we're nearing the end of our questions, Craig. So before we go into that, so I presume that you, Marion, and dogs are moving to the Falkland Islands. Is that the plan?
Yeah, so hopefully I should get my work permit in the next few weeks or whatever. So hopefully I will be leaving the end of May, somewhere around about that, and I'll be going down first, and then Marion will probably follow with dogs, maybe 3 months later or whatever. To get the house set up and everything. Make sure they actually want me. Don't want to move all the way down there and they say we don't like this guy.
He's not diplomatic enough to our politicians.
Yeah.
That'll be very good, Craig, if you turn up and it just the job you thought.
I think they'll have worked me out within 3 months. I'll have upset whoever. If someone's likely to get upset, I'd have managed to do it by then, I think, to be quite honest. So I think if I'm still there after 3 months and all the rest of it, it's probably safe to bring Marion down. And again, it's a 4-year contract with a view to an extension, and you never know. You never know what's going to happen at the end of the day. So could end up being there for even longer.
Well, you'll be pleased to know, sorry, Jane, we'll be pleased to know that I have joined the Falkland Islands Facebook page for the running club, because they do some quite impressive race. They do a marathon, they do half marathons and all the rest. So I'm keeping a wee eye on that. So once you get yourself settled down.
You just missed one.
I know I did. I'll get next year.
Apparently,
and they must have some cycling stuff down there as well, Alistair. We could go for a Albion trip. Yeah. Do you think we could have that as our team building?
It's maybe a wee bit far for an Albion trip, I think.
Well, you'll be welcome. We've got the house we've got, it's got a spare bedroom, so you'll be welcome to come and stay. So I also suspect as well, because I've tried to do a bit of research, although the job is a health and safety job, I'm always thinking about waste as well. So I've tried to do a bit of research on the waste side of things, and there is an ongoing project at the moment. I couldn't find a lot of details about it. But traditionally, there was a very old landfill site, a place called Mare Harbour, which is near Mount Pleasant, which is where the RAF base is, about 40 miles north of Stanley. And again, I don't think it was a particularly engineered landfill site. I think it was probably an old quarry that's been used. And obviously, you sort of get away with it when you've got a very small population, which doesn't have a lot of high-end goods that have got a lot of toxic materials and et cetera, et cetera. But I think it's got to the stage now where they're seriously looking about, how can they look at managing their waste on how much they do. I think rely on the MOD quite a bit, because the MOD have obviously backload materials back to the UK. So a lot of things like the hazardous waste that the RAF would be producing or whatever would be getting shipped back on the flights, I'm imagining, or going back on the RFA ship or whatever. And I don't know this, but I'm guessing that people like the government there would probably also try and use that facility, as well. But obviously, the other big thing we talk about is the proximity principle, isn't it? We want to be managing stuff as close as possible to where it's being produced. And obviously, backloading at 8,500 miles to the UK is probably environmentally not necessarily the best thing. If they can, if they've got the facilities on the island to deal with it. It always used to make me laugh, this. So when I used to be the manager of Green Gaze, because it was the biggest site, we used to get all of the, I think it was part of one of the, is it the Leonardo da Vinci program or something, where they would get like teachers and stuff going to different countries and all the rest of it. So yeah, we used to get loads of geography type teachers and environmental sort of science lecturers and stuff, and they used to come to Green Gaze to come and have a look at this. And I remember having a conversation with a sort of Dutch one and a Belgian one about how appalling we are in the UK about landfilling stuff and all the rest of it, and about how high their recycling rate was. And then it was like, well, where is your recycling going to? And they said, well, most of it goes to China. And I'm sitting there saying, I said, so you're telling me that putting the stuff on a ship and shipping it 12,000 miles to another country, where I think we all know it's not getting managed in an environmentally good way of doing things, I says that's better than managing a fully engineered landfill site here. And I think when we actually went to show them what we did, I think they were quite surprised that it wasn't just a hole in the ground that you just dump stuff into. And when they saw the power station there, and we're actually getting making renewable energy and all the rest of it, I think they were sitting there saying, actually, this is not what we were expecting. We just thought this would be a massive hole in the ground, you just dumping stuff in and leaving it. And I'm saying, well, yeah, that's how it started, but again, things have come a long way. And I'm not saying landfill is the be all and end all. It's not. All I'm saying is it's part and parcel of a larger suite of things that we need at the end of the day. But I've never been convinced by shipping stuff thousands of miles away to do something with it. I just thinking, how is that environmentally the right thing to do?
Definitely. Right, your last few questions, Craig. A piece of slang or dialect that you like or loathe, or
So I'm going to do the one that I've already mentioned at the end of the day. So when I told the story about how I came to do their calculations for the ash. So when I was in the army, we used to have this saying, if you will, and it was called the rule of swag. And the rule of swag meant, well, swag stood for scientific wild ass guess at the end of the day. So whenever you had to do something that you couldn't quite work out, the calculations for, you would use this rule of swag at the end of the day. It's like, well, have a guess, but try and base the guess as much as possible on some sort of science at the end of the day, or some sort of stuff. And I've pretty much done it on my entire career, and 9 times out of 10 it's managed to work for me at the end of the day. So yeah, although when I was working over in Serbia, there was a German doctor there, and it was Dr. Uti Piper, her name was. Fantastic lady. But she was a doctor of engineering, so you could imagine she was a very, very serious person. And when I tried to explain this rule of swag to her, she was just like, oh my God, because she just couldn't get her head around anyone actually guessing anything at the end of the day. So no, it had to be calculated to the nth degree. It's like, no, get close enough and then just guess the rest. And she's like, no, that's just not possible.
I think you'll say it with such conviction, Craig, that people will believe you.
It's like, oh yeah, it must be true.
Yes.
No, I quite like that one. So I'm going to bravely give you a magic wand to change something about the waste industry. What would you like to use it for?
I'll tell you what, I had a long think about this one. And to be honest, it's not just the waste industry. I'd like to use this for many, many things. And my magic wand thing would be, I think we need to get away from legislation and start thinking about education. I can't see the point in having all these rules which we don't apply anyway and don't enforce. Do you know what I mean? When actually, if we educated people to do the right thing, they're more likely to do it than, so I do think it's all about, let's put the emphasis back on educating people onto why they want to do stuff and, and the benefits of it, rather than just bringing another rule that's not going to be enforced anyway. For instance, have you ever heard of any prosecution related to someone not applying the waste hierarchy?
Nope.
So that has been that was brought into UK legislation 2010, 2011 in Scotland. Yeah. In fact, not only has it never been prosecuted for it, I can't think of any of the enforcement, whether that be SEPA or the Environment Agency, they've even asked the question. So why did we go through the process of bringing this in as a rule, as a law? You must do this if you've got no you've got no way of actual or no real sort of gumption to go out there and enforce it. It's a bit like things like the duty of care. The duty of care doesn't need amending, it needs enforcing at the end of the day. And if you enforced it properly and all the rest of it, people would get the message and they would start doing it, and then it becomes this self-sustaining system at the end of the day. So I think educating people, and I'll give you an example, is that I used to drive boats and stuff when I was in the army, and if you drive a boat in Europe, you need a license, because there's a law that says you need to have a driving license for a boat. Yeah. In the UK, you don't need one. So people are saying, yeah, but that's mad because people will have an accident and all the rest of it. And if you look at the accident statistics for accidents on boats in the United Kingdom and compare it to, say, Germany and all the rest of it, where you need a license, do you know what? We're not actually any worse. In fact, we're better. And yet we don't need it but people over here are basically persuaded, okay, you don't need a license, but we reckon you should go and do a training course. You should get yourself on an RYA course or this, that, and the other. And so even though it's not mandatory and all the rest of it, people do it. And because they wanted to do it, do you know what I mean? Rather than being forced to do it, and I think it's a similar thing here. If we can persuade people that it's a good thing to apply the duty of care, or it's a good thing to recycle more at home and everything, through educating people, that will be a longer lasting fix than bringing in rules that we don't apply.
Yeah, that's interesting about the duty of care thing, actually, because that was one of the questions I asked SEPA at the
last week
CIWM spring meeting. How many prosecutions have you taken from duty of care? And he looked at me completely blank, didn't he, Alistair?
Absolutely.
And we all know here, because of the job that we do, that you can look at virtually any waste transfer note or any sort of stuff, and there is issues on there. All of them would technically be a breach of the law, and yet nothing gets done.
Yeah. So, last question, Craig, because you deal with quite a lot of the younger generation coming through as modern apprentices. What advice would you give them coming into the sector?
So there's a couple of bits, and the first one is like, you need to be proud. Do you know, if you're coming to work the waste sector, because sometimes we get the guys and you ask the question, how did you get here? Oh, because all the other places and all the other courses have gone, so I ended up down here as like the last resort and all this type of stuff. Or even the guys that that came into work for Glasgow City Council, and you go around the room and say, tell me what you do, and they'll say, oh, I'm just a bin man. And I'll be like, stop you right there. You're not just anything at the end of the day. You're a vital cog, in the machine that we need in this country to keep things going. And if you can't respect your own job, then you can't expect other people to respect it either. So the first things first is to say to them, look, if you're in the sector, you should be proud of the sector. It's very, very important. Because the other thing I say to them, did you work through COVID? And they went, yeah, worked all the time through COVID. And I was sitting there saying, right, okay, then how many lawyers, how many accountants, how many senior managers worked through COVID? Well, no, they're all sitting at home. I said, so what does that tell you about the jobs that are really important at the end of the day? The cleaners, the drivers, you know what I mean? And I think, people equate salary to worth of job. And I think we need to get out of that habit, that just because a job hasn't got a high salary doesn't mean say it's not worth stuff. So that's the first thing. But once you're in the industry, I think you really need to, I think this is the same in any industry you go to, but networking. It's all about, it's not what you know, it's who you know. And I remember when I was at Green Gears, I was asked to join the NGG, the CRWM New Generation Group, for all the sort of new managers coming in. So I was asked by my boss at the time, says, oh, we want you to do this to represent the private sector. And I went, no. Well, why not? Because I didn't see CRWM as anything relating to me at all. I just saw it full of local authority guys and consultants. There was no one there that did, I would have said does a normal day's work at the end of the day. So I didn't see it as being relevant at all. But I was persuaded. I think the persuasion went like, well, they're doing a 2-day conference in Blackpool and we'll pay for you to go and give you and pay for your drink while you're there. I went, right, okay, I'll join then. I'll join. And I went, and I'm so glad I did. What a difference that's made to my career at the end of the day. Because I ended up meeting people, again, none of them were from the private sector. So they were the consultants I was moaning about. They were the council guys I was moaning about. And you get to see the real people rather than what you perceive to be the real people. And those same people I think I've kept in touch with. I ended up a volunteer from the committee, etc., and they have helped me out, no end. So one of the ladies there at the time, she was sitting there saying, like, you should be going for your chartered status. I was like, no, I don't, back to this, can't see what's in it for me. So she persuaded me to go through the process. And then obviously from the other side, because I wasn't a graduate and stuff like that, it's not like it is now. The routes hadn't been developed that have been now. And because she was on the national committee, so she was on the NGG committee, but she also represented the Scottish Centre nationally. And she did a lot of work to try and get, myself, my chartered status. And again, once that had happened, you prove the route for the next person coming through. So that then allowed me to go to the next manager I'm doing a CHC for, saying, why didn't you join CRWM? Well, what's the point? Well, actually, no, there is a point, and it is getting, and the more of people like us get in here, the more we can, make sure it represents us. So it is about knowing people, get to know people, and then sort of use that as a resource. Don't be frightened to pick the phone up and speak to them.
I had exactly that conversation this morning, Craig, with somebody that's been running landfills for about 2.5 years, and he was saying, oh, I don't know which option to go for, whether chartered or whatever. And I said, oh, you've got a degree, haven't you? And he said, no, he's a civil engineer by trade, but he's not degree qualified. And I assumed he had. And he said, no. And I said, well, your best route is get your COTC, get your technical competence. And from that, then you've got a route into getting your CRWM chartered. But I think there's a bit of since COVID, there's been a bit of people aren't as good at networking. They're not as good at going to events, and I think it's part of this. You think you're efficient because you're sitting on a computer doing 10 team calls a day, and sometimes you just need that. Where you go to an event and just meet various people and different people you don't know, and I think particularly younger people need to actually make themselves take the time out and do that, because I think it's certainly been important for me, and I think
and me,
it's
totally.
been important for yourself. So yeah.
I'm not natural at it, Alistair. I don't. I'm not natural at it, but I've seen the difference that it makes if you make that effort to say, I'll go and speak to that person. Do you know what I mean? I'll try and get to know that person. Do you know what I mean? And it is, and anyone that does that, it will help your career tremendously at the end of the day. And it doesn't even matter if they're even if they're not even, because the amount of times I'm thinking to myself, I don't know anything about this subject, but I once met the guy, and I've got his telephone number. I'll give him a wee ring. You know what I mean? Can you give us a wee bit of help here? And I think you are right, because everyone now is doing things through Teams. So you go to, but then, yes, you're getting some of that information coming, but you're not getting a lot of the information you get from the people sitting to the left and right of you in the audience, not necessarily for what the person standing up talking is. And I think that's the bit that's now missing.
Absolutely. Well, thank you for that, Craig. You've exhausted our extensive list of questions. And more, absolutely. Before we go, I would like to personally thank you, because you are my longest serving subcontractor, going back to probably 2002, I would suggest, when I needed another partner in crime to do WAMATAB assessments. And I think, if my memory is correct, my first WAMATAB candidates were at Viridor. I think it was, what was it, Scott Waste it was called at the time. And I think I managed to pick up a contract for 4 candidates when I was at Ibrox at the football. Somebody had kindly invited me to football, and I managed to pick up the candidates, and they were the first candidates I've ever got. So we've shared quite an interesting journey over the years in terms of WAMATAB assessments and training courses.
It's a bit extreme though, heading off down to the Falklands
because you've had enough.
You know what I mean? To be fair.
Surprised Alison never told the story of this when you were talking about Ibrox there. Do you remember the presentation we did for the British Metal Recycling Association with all the scrap dealers?
Oh, why? What happened with that? We were about to get chased out of the place, weren't we?
Yeah, well, yeah. Basically, if you remember rightly, they were going to come under the waste management licensing. So they were basically, SEPA were sitting there saying, right, you're going to need a license for your scrap yard, and we're not going to give it to you unless you concrete your yards and do all this sort of stuff. So of course, this information had to go to people who are not very happy with the information. You and I thought we were going to have to do a runner at one stage, didn't we? I think we were going to get shot. Lots of people are sitting there saying that's not going to be happening, and all the rest of it.
That never did turn out to be the work stream we expected. The plans of getting loads of work from that sector never quite materialised. But anyway.
I'm sort of glad in a way, though.
Absolutely.
Those Rottweilers that get in the way.
Yeah. So good luck when you do finally head to the Falkland Islands. I'm sure we'll keep. We're in roughly the same time zone, aren't we? It's the same. I think it is the same time zone, isn't it? How many hours behind?
It's not much, is it? 3.
There we go. So it's not far off. Okay. Well, thank you very much. Thank you for your time.
No problems. Thank you very much for having me.
Thank you, Craig.
Thank you, Jane.